No one noticed the silence at first. The war chamber of the Galactic Concord was never quiet. There were always voices, alarms, glowing tactical maps, and the low hum of machines calculating death across 1,000 star systems. Silence did not belong here. That was why it felt wrong. The commanders of 12 major species stood frozen as the sound faded away. Weapons reports stopped mid-sentence. Fleet projections vanished from the air. Even the war outside, the largest conflict the galaxy had ever seen, seemed to hold its breath. At the center of the chamber, a single-star map remained active. A new symbol had appeared. It did not match any known fleet signature. "Identify," ordered High Marshal Kethrix, his voice sharp with authority and unease. No answer came. The tactical AI tried again and again. Its processing core overheated as it searched through millions of registered ship designs, ancient records, forgotten wars, and extinct civilizations. No match found. The symbol multiplied. One contact became 5. 5 became dozens. Dozens became a pattern, perfect, deliberate, and moving directly toward the heart of the conflict. "They're not part of either alliance," someone whispered. "That's impossible," another replied. "Every power that matters is already fighting." A junior archivist, small and overlooked, felt a cold weight settle in her chest. Her display had not gone blank like the others. Instead, it had opened something old, something sealed. A red warning pulsed across her screen. Forbidden historical record accessed. Her hands trembled as lines of corrupted text slowly rebuilt themselves. A name appeared. At first, she thought it was a translation error. Then the system corrected itself. Humanity. Her breath caught. She had never seen that word before. Not in school. Not in military briefings. Not in any public archive. And yet, the system treated it as something once very important. She looked up. "Hi, Marshal, there's something you need to see." Kethrix turned, irritated. "This is not the time. It's classified beyond council authority," she said quietly. "And it's waking up on its own." That made him stop. The record expanded across the chamber walls. Ancient timestamps scrolled past. Entire centuries compressed into seconds. The war leaders watched as pieces of history they had never been taught unfolded before them. A species removed from all treaties. A founding member of nothing. A power that had existed and then deliberately vanished. One line repeated again and again across different eras, written in dozens of languages. "Do not provoke them. Do not pursue them. If they return, it will be because the galaxy has failed." A low murmur spread through the chamber. "Are they extinct?" someone asked. The archivist swallowed. "No." "Then where are they?" The record did not answer with coordinates. It answered with a final note, flagged as a warning rather than information. Humanity withdrew beyond known space after the Cataclysm vote. All contact terminated by their own choice. Kethrix felt something he had not felt in decades of war. Dread. Before he could speak, alarm screamed back to life. Louder, harsher, panicked. "Multiple battlefronts reporting interference," a technician shouted. "Weapons are failing to lock. Sensors are returning null data." On the main display, one of the unknown fleets passed directly through an active combat zone. Plasma fire bent away from it. Missiles vanished before impact. 2 enemy armadas, locked in brutal engagement seconds before, fell silent as their systems shut down simultaneously. The unknown ships did not fire. They did not maneuver aggressively. They simply moved through, untouched, unstoppable. A veteran commander whispered the thought none of them wanted to say. "They're not here to fight." The archivist's screen updated on its own. A new line appeared beneath the ancient warning. "Status change. Observation phase active." Then, for the first time, the unknown fleet altered course. Not toward a military target. Not toward a capital world. But toward the galactic core, where the War Council itself was located. The chamber lights dimmed. External sensors finally resolved a visual. The ships were massive. Dark. Smooth. Marked with no symbols of ownership, conquest, or pride. Just numbers. Cold. Patient. Waiting. Kethrix stared at the display as a realization settled over him like a death sentence. Humanity had not returned because they were needed. They had returned because the galaxy had proven something. The myth was real, and it was watching. The first fleet to die did not realize it was under attack. Admiral Soren of the Vectal Dominion watched the tactical sphere with calm confidence. His armada surrounded a shattered moon, their enemy trapped between debris and gravity wells. The battle had lasted 3 days. Victory was inevitable. Then the stars went wrong. Status report, Soren said. No one answered. The glowing tactical sphere flickered. Enemy icons froze. Friendly signals dimmed, then returned with distorted shapes and impossible readings. Power levels fluctuated without cause. Target locks blinked red, then vanished. Helm, correct our orientation, Soren ordered. We haven't moved, Admiral. The pilot replied, voice tight. But the reference stars just shifted. That was when the shadows passed over them. Not one ship. Many. They slid through the battlefield like ghosts, enormous silhouettes against the distant light of a blue giant star. No engine flares. No heat signatures. No gravitational wake. They did not arrive. They were simply there. Identify those vessels, Soren snapped. The sensor officer stared at his console, mandibles twitching in panic. I can't. They aren't registering as matter or energy. Sir, weapons arrays are powering down on their own. As if in response, every cannon along the Vectal flagship went dark. Across the battlefield, the same thing happened. Hundreds of ships, on both sides, fell silent. Shields collapsed gently, not violently, like systems being put to sleep. No hostile action detected, the AI announced, its synthetic voice struggling to remain neutral. All combat systems disabled by external override. Soren felt something crawl up his spine. No one has override authority over my fleet, he said. The shadows kept moving. They did not slow. They did not acknowledge the armada around them. They passed straight through the battlefield, cutting between frozen ships, close enough that Soren could see their surfaces, smooth, dark, almost absorbing light itself. There were no markings, no flags, no declaration of war. They're ignoring us, the sensor officer whispered. The words felt heavier than any threat. Across the galaxy, the same reports poured in. At Front Sigma, 2 rival dreadnoughts drifted helplessly as unknown vessels passed between them, weapons silent, crews powerless to act. At the Jorith Expanse, a planetary defense grid went offline for exactly 12 seconds, long enough for the shadows to pass. Then came back online as if nothing had happened. At a classified research system, a prototype superweapon failed its test cycle for the first time in its history. Everywhere, the same pattern repeated. No destruction, no casualties, no explanation, only interruption. In the Galactic Concord war chamber, panic replaced disbelief. They're inside our command and control layers, a systems analyst shouted. They're not hacking, they're rewriting in real time. That's not possible, another commander snapped. Those layers are quantum isolated. Then explain why every battlefield just went blind at the same moment. The archivist stood frozen at her station, eyes locked on the ancient record that continued to update without permission. A new data stream had appeared. It was not written in any known galactic language, yet everyone could read it. Observation in progress, conflict parameters, acceptable escalation threshold, approaching. What does that mean? Someone demanded. Before anyone could answer, a transmission broke through all channels at once. It did not originate from a ship. It did not originate from a planet. It seemed to come from the space between signals. The voice was not alien. It was calm, measured, human. This is a courtesy notice, the voice said. Do not attempt to engage. Do not attempt to follow. Continue your conflict as you see fit. The chamber erupted. Jam that signal. Trace the source. Fire on the fleet nearest to us. None of it worked. The voice continued, unbothered. We are not participants at this time. We are observers. Kethrix leaned forward, claws gripping the edge of the command platform. You interfere with active war zones and claim neutrality. Yes, the human voice replied. Why? There was a pause. Not static. Not delay. A deliberate silence. To understand, the voice said. Whether this outcome was inevitable. The transmission ended. No threats. No demands. Just judgment implied, not spoken. Out on the battlefield, Admiral Soren watched as the last of the shadow ships passed beyond sensor range. One by one, his systems came back online. Weapons powered up. Shields reformed. Targeting solutions returned. The enemy fleet across the debris field stirred at the same moment. For several long seconds, no one fired. The war had resumed. But something fundamental had changed. Admiral, the sensor officer said quietly, they logged everything. Soren turned. What? Every scan. Every weapons discharge. Every casualty. They recorded it all. Soren stared at the empty space where the shadows had been. They weren't scouting, he said. They were studying, the officer replied. Back in the Concord chamber, the ancient record expanded further. The archivist scrolled through newly unlocked sections, her breath shallow. It detailed past conflicts. Not victories. Failures. Wars that escalated beyond control. Species that crossed lines they could not uncross. Moments when humanity intervened, not to conquer, but to end things. And beneath each entry, the same cold notation. Intervention deemed necessary. Kethrix felt a chill settle deep in his core. How many times have they done this? He asked. The archivist shook her head slowly. Unknown. Most records were erased. Erased by whom? She looked up at him. By them. A junior strategist spoke up, voice shaking. High Marshal, the unknown fleets are repositioning. Where? The strategist swallowed. Everywhere. New symbols filled the star map. Not clustering. Not forming battle lines. They were spreading out. Strategic choke points. Supply routes. Communication relays. Research systems. Not attacking. Positioning. They're surrounding the war, someone whispered. No. Kethrix said slowly. They're containing it. Another transmission came through, this one not broadcast widely. It was addressed only to the Concord. The same calm human voice spoke. You have continued your conflict, it said. This was expected. Kethrix straightened. You said you were observers. We are, the voice replied. Observation does not mean indifference. What do you want? Kethrix demanded. A pause. We want to know, the voice said, how far you are willing to go. The archivist's screen flashed again. Escalation threshold imminent. At that exact moment, reports flooded in. A fringe alliance had authorized deployment of a stellar collapse weapon. A weapon banned by every treaty. A weapon capable of turning a star into a bomb. Silence filled the chamber. Kethrix felt his blood run cold. They're going to destroy an entire system, he said. Yes, the human voice replied. And if they do? There was another pause. This one felt heavier. Then, the voice said, observation will end. Across the galaxy, the shadow fleets stopped moving. They turned. And for the first time, their weapons powered on. The stellar collapse weapon did not announce itself with light or sound. It announced itself with certainty. Deep within the Zaltor Protectorate's command vault, a single indicator shifted from authorized to active. That was all. No alarms. No dramatic countdown. The weapon had been designed to be used once, quickly, before anyone could stop it. A star did not need much encouragement to die. At the edge of the affected system, human shadow fleets watched. They did not move. They did not interfere. They waited. High Marshal Kethrix felt the shift before the confirmation arrived. Years of command had trained his instincts to recognize the moment when war turned into something worse. Status, he demanded. The strategist did not look up from her console. The Zaltor have initiated stellar collapse procedures. Detonation window, 8 minutes. The war chamber erupted. They can't. That system holds 3 inhabited worlds. It violates every compact. Kethrix slammed a claw into the command platform. Open a channel to the Zaltor. Now. The connection took longer than usual, as if something was allowing it rather than facilitating it. At last, the image of Overlord Sharun filled the air. His expression was calm. Resolved. You have lost control of this war, Sharun said. We are ending it. By murdering billions? Kethrix snarled. By demonstrating finality, the Overlord replied. When the enemy sees what we are willing to do, they will surrender. Kethrix glanced at the ancient records still hovering in the chamber. The warnings. The erased histories. The line that repeated like a curse. If they return, it will be because the galaxy has failed. You don't understand what you're doing, Kethrix said quietly. Sharun tilted his head. Enlighten me. Before Kethrix could answer, another presence joined the channel. No warning. No request. The human voice spoke. Cancel the weapon. Sharun stiffened. This channel is. Cancel the weapon. The voice repeated, calm but absolute. The Overlord's mandibles flared. You do not command us, myth. There was no anger in the reply. Correct, the human said. We are informing you. Sharun laughed, sharp and dismissive. You have interfered enough. You claim to judge us, yet you allow this war to continue. You will watch this as well. For the first time, the human voice changed. Not louder, colder. This device crosses the threshold. What threshold? Sharon demanded. The one you were warned about, the voice said. Though you erased the warning. The Overlord's eyes narrowed. Then stop us. There was a pause. Not because the humans hesitated, because they were deciding how much to reveal. At the edge of the doomed system, the star began to fluctuate. Sensors across the sector screamed as gravity twisted inward. Light bent. Planets trembled in their orbits. On one of those worlds, a civilian transport struggled to break atmosphere, engines straining as the sky darkened. Its captain looked up through the viewport and saw something impossible. The human ships had moved. They formed a vast, silent arc between the star and the inhabited worlds. Thousands of them, appearing from folded space in perfect synchronization. No formation markings. No communication chatter. Just alignment. What are they doing? The co-pilot whispered. The answer came too late. In the Concorde chamber, the archivist gasped as her screen flooded with unlocked data. Entire sections of history, long sealed, burst open. Humanity had not left because they were weak. They had left because they had learned something. They had discovered how to manipulate fundamental forces, gravity, time, causality itself, on scales that terrified even them. And they had seen what lesser species would do with that knowledge. So they walked away. They buried themselves in myth. And they left behind one rule. Never destroy a star. Kethrix felt his breath catch. That's why the record ends there, he said. That's the line. The archivist nodded, tears forming. Every intervention, every erased war, it happened after a stellar weapon was activated. The strategist looked up sharply. Hi, Marshal. The star's collapse is accelerating. Detonation in 90 seconds. At the edge of the system, the human arc ignited. Not with weapons. With space itself. Gravity twisted outward, not inward. Time slowed. Light fractured into colors no species had names for. The star screamed. Not audibly, but in data, in radiation spikes, in equations breaking apart. The collapse reversed. The stellar core stabilized. The weapon failed. Across the galaxy, scientists watched in horror and awe as the impossible occurred. A star refused to die. Overlord Sharon stared at his console in disbelief. That's impossible. The weapon cannot be stopped once. It can, the human voice said. It has been. Sharon snarled. You have made your point. You've shown your power. Now withdraw. No, the human replied. A ripple passed through the shadow fleets. Weapons powered fully. Not to fire. To exist. For the first time, every sensor could see them clearly. Their scale. Their density. Their numbers. They were not a fleet. They were an answer. This was your final warning, the human voice said. You have demonstrated willingness to erase entire systems to win. Sharon straightened. We will not be judged by a species that abandoned the galaxy. You are not being judged, the human said. You are being contained. Across Zaltor space, something happened. Every military vessel shut down. Every command node went dark. Every shipyard froze mid-construction. Civilian infrastructure remained untouched. Life support stayed online. No deaths. No explosions. Just paralysis. What have you done? Sharon whispered. The reply was immediate. We have removed your ability to wage war, the human said. Nothing more. You can't do this. Sharon shouted. We are a sovereign power. Yes, the human replied. And now you are a peaceful one. In the Concorde chamber, no one spoke. They watched as reports streamed in. Zaltor fleets disabled. Weapon systems inert. No casualties reported. Kethrix finally understood. Humanity was not choosing sides. They were choosing limits. The archivist's screen updated one last time. Escalation threshold. Breached intervention status. Active. Kethrix felt the weight of the future settle onto his shoulders. This isn't the end of the war, he said quietly. No, the archivist replied. It's the end of how wars are fought. Far beyond the galactic core, within human-controlled void space, an unseen council watched the data scroll past. One human spoke, voice heavy with old memory. They crossed the line. Another nodded. They always do. A third looked at the projection of the stabilized star. Phase 1 is complete, she said. The galaxy has been reminded. And Phase 2, someone asked. The first human closed his eyes. Now, he said, we teach them the cost of ignoring warnings. The shadow fleets adjusted their positions. Across the galaxy, every species felt it. The sense that something ancient had awakened. Not in anger, in responsibility. And this time, humanity was not leaving. The human voice returned exactly 60 seconds after the Zaltor fleets went dark, and this time it did not sound distant. It sounded close, as if it were speaking from inside the walls of every command chamber at once. "This is a system-wide broadcast," the voice said. "All factions, all command authorities, all listening stations." Across the galaxy, the message cut through everything. Civilian news feeds froze on half-spoken sentences. Military orders stopped mid-command. Ancient relay stations, abandoned for centuries, activated only to carry the signal forward. "You have been given 1 hour." In the Galactic Concord war chamber, no one moved. The timer appeared without explanation on every screen, every console, every personal display. 59 minutes and 59 seconds. High Marshal Kethrix felt his secondary hearts tighten. 1 hour for what? He asked. For decision, the human replied. And for honesty. The timer continued to count down. Panic followed immediately. Voices rose, overlapping and sharp. Commanders demanded clarification. Strategists shouted questions about enforcement, about limits, about whether this was a bluff or a declaration of control. The human voice waited for the noise to burn itself out. "We are aware," it said calmly, "that many of you are attempting to test our limits." As if summoned by the words, reports flooded the chamber. A fringe coalition fired a limited strike at a human perimeter ship. The weapons vanished before reaching their target, not exploding, not deflecting, simply ceasing to exist. A stealth wing attempted to bypass a containment zone. Their drives shut down mid-jump, leaving them drifting between systems with no power and no casualties. A research enclave tried to siphon sensor data from a human vessel. The data erased itself, followed by the archive that attempted to store it. "They're not reacting," Kethrix said quietly, watching the reports scroll. "They're allowing it." "Yes," the human voice replied. "We are allowing you to explore the edges." The timer slipped past 55 minutes. "What decision do you want from us?" Kethrix demanded. "Surrender? Disarmament? Submission?" "None of the above," the human said. The pause that followed felt intentional, heavy with meaning. "We want to know whether you are capable of stopping yourselves." The chamber fell silent. "That isn't an answer," one commander snapped. "It is the only answer that matters," the human replied. The archivist's console chimed softly. She looked down and froze. A new layer of the ancient record had unlocked, not violently as before, but gently, as if permission had been granted. It was not a military log. It was not a warning. It was personal. Human writings filled the display, translated flawlessly into every known language. A letter appeared first. "A vote was taken today. We begged them to stop. They said war demands escalation. They said stars are resources. We said stars are homes." Another followed. "We won the war. We lost everything else." Then another. "Power is easy. Restraint is the hardest thing we ever learned." Kethrix felt a chill spread through his frame. "These aren't threats," he said slowly. "They're confessions." "Yes," the human voice said. "We are not proud of our past." The timer dropped below 50 minutes. Across the galaxy, something unexpected began to happen. At Front Sigma, two rival admirals opened a direct channel for the first time in years. Neither spoke at first. Then one said, "Stand down." The other replied, "Agreed." In the Jorith expanse, a carrier group powered down its launch bays and transmitted a ceasefire code without authorization. It was obeyed anyway. On a shattered border world, civilians looked up as orbital fire simply stopped. The sky grew quiet for the first time in months. But not everyone chose restraint. In the outer regions, the Karen Syndicate gathered its war council. Their empire had been built on conflict. Their economy, their culture, their authority all depended on conquest. Peace was not survival to them. Peace was collapse. The vote was unanimous. Attack. A massive Karen strike fleet surged forward, engines burning hot, weapons charging to maximum output. They did not aim at the human fleets. They aimed at their oldest enemy, intending to end the war before the hour expired. "We will finish this now," the Karen warlord declared. "Let the myth watch." The human voice did not interrupt. The timer continued to fall. Back in the Concord chamber, Kethrix slammed his claw into the command platform. They're going to force your hand, he said. They'll prove the galaxy can't stop itself. Yes, the human replied. And then what? Kethrix asked. Then we will stop it for you. The words were calm. Final. Not a threat, but a statement of fact. Another human testimony appeared on the archivist's screen. The day we realized the truth was the day we sealed our borders. If we stayed, we would become gods. And gods do not make good neighbors. They're afraid of themselves, the archivist whispered. They should be, Kethrix replied. The timer dropped below 20 minutes. The Karen fleet engaged. Thousands died in the first exchange. Cities burned. A planet's upper atmosphere ignited under sustained bombardment, turning night into fire. Across the galaxy, every species watched. The human fleets did not move. They're letting it happen, someone whispered. No, Kethrix said. They're letting us choose. The human voice returned, quieter now, but unmistakable. The hour is almost complete, it said. Your actions are recorded. The voice addressed the Karen warlord directly. You have chosen continuation. And you have chosen to watch, the warlord snarled. For now, the human replied. The timer slipped below 10 minutes. Leaders across the galaxy made frantic decisions. Some ordered retreats. Some declared ceasefires. Some shut down communications entirely, hoping silence might count as wisdom. Kethrix straightened and spoke as if the galaxy itself were listening. The Concord chooses restraint, he said. All member fleets disengage. Effective immediately, confirmations arrived one by one. Weapons powered down. Engines slowed. The war that had seemed unstoppable only hours earlier began to collapse under its own weight. Everywhere except Karen space. They won't stop, the archivist said. No, Kethrix replied. They can't. The timer reached its final minute. The human voice spoke one last time before the countdown ended. You have shown us who you are, it said. Individually. Collectively. The final seconds vanished. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the human fleets moved. Not everywhere. Only in Karen space. In a single, synchronized moment, every Karen military system shut down. Weapons went inert. Drives powered off. Command networks dissolved into static. No explosions. No loss of life. Just sudden, absolute silence. The ongoing battle froze mid-destruction. On the burning planet below, orbital fires ceased. Fires died. The sky darkened. The Karen warlord stared at his dead console. What did you do? He whispered. The human voice answered, calm and unyielding. We removed your capacity to choose violence, it said, because you proved you could not choose otherwise. Across the galaxy, fear and relief collided. Kethrix closed his eyes. It's over, someone said. No. Kethrix replied quietly. It's decided. On the archivist's screen, a final line appeared. Observation complete. Restraint confirmed. Intervention selective. Far beyond known space, human observers watched the galaxy settle into an uneasy quiet. They stopped themselves, one of them said. Some of them. And the rest? Another asked. The first human looked at the map of a suddenly silent galaxy. The rest, she said, will learn. The shadow fleets held position. The galaxy held its breath. And humanity waited, no longer a myth, but a boundary the stars themselves now recognized. The galaxy did not celebrate. When the fighting stopped, there were no cheers, no victory signals, no shared relief across channels. Silence spread instead, heavy and uncertain, like the moment after a natural disaster when survivors realize the world has changed shape. Ships drifted where fleets once clashed. Wreckage cooled in space. On planets spared at the last moment, people stepped outside and looked at quiet skies they no longer trusted. In the Concord War Chamber, High Marshal Kethrix remained standing long after the last confirmation arrived. The war was over. Not won. Not lost. Ended. And none of it felt right. They didn't punish us, one commander said softly. They punished the refusal to stop. Yes, Kethrix replied. And that may be worse. The human fleets remained in position. They did not withdraw. They did not advance. They simply existed, silent and impossible to ignore, at every major junction of power in the galaxy. Containment, not occupation. The archivist watched her display update in slow, steady intervals. Not alerts. Not warnings. Status reports. Human observers deployed. Escalation vectors sealed. Superweapon research nodes isolated. They're not dismantling our governments, she said. They're dismantling our excuses. Kethrix exhaled slowly. That's more dangerous than conquest. Across the galaxy, reactions fractured along old lines. Some species complied immediately. Fleets returned to dock. Military budgets froze. Emergency councils rewrote doctrine overnight, inserting a new, unspoken rule beneath every clause. Do not cross the human line. Others resisted quietly. They tested small boundaries, delayed compliance, hid weapons rather than surrender them. Each attempt failed without spectacle. A drive that would not engage. A factory that could no longer produce key components. A weapons platform that simply refused to power on. No explanation was ever given. In Karen space, the silence was absolute. The Karen warlord sat alone in his command chamber, surrounded by dark screens and dead systems. His empire had not been destroyed. His fleets still existed. His people still lived. But the thing that had defined them was gone. You crippled us, he transmitted at last, broadcasting blindly into the void. The human reply came instantly. No, the voice said. We stabilized you. You decided who we are, the warlord snarled. No, the human replied. You showed us. The channel closed. For the first time in his life, the warlord understood fear not as threat, but as irrelevance. In the Concord chamber, the ancient record shifted again. The archivist frowned. They're unlocking another layer. Kethrix turned. Another warning? No, she said slowly. Another cost. The display filled with images of human-controlled space beyond the galactic rim. Vast regions of engineered void. Artificial stars held in rigid frameworks. Massive structures designed not for expansion, but for containment. These are sacrifice zones, the archivist whispered. Human-controlled regions deliberately isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Entire systems sealed behind gravity locks and temporal distortions, used as buffers against weapons and forces no one else was allowed to touch. Kethrix felt a chill. They're walling themselves in. Yes, she replied. To wall the rest of us out. A human transmission followed, not broadcast widely this time, but sent directly to the Concord. You have questions, the voice said. This is reasonable. Kethrix straightened. You speak of restraint, yet you wield absolute power. Why should the galaxy trust you? There was a pause, longer than before. Because, the human replied, we pay for every line we draw. The display changed again. Human colonies evacuating. Entire populations relocating under controlled gravity shifts. Stars dimmed deliberately, their output reduced to stabilize containment fields. Millions of lives disrupted. Not destroyed, but uprooted. These people volunteered, the archivist said, voice unsteady. They're choosing this. Yes, the human voice confirmed. Containment requires proximity. Proximity carries risk. We do not assign that risk to others. Kethrix felt something tighten in his chest. You could force us to bear it. Yes, the human said. We chose not to. Across the galaxy, whispers spread. Humanity had not ended the war for free. They had taken responsibility. That frightened people more than their weapons ever could. On a remote world once destined for orbital cleansing, a family stood beneath a sky that should have been burning. The father held his child and looked up at the distant silhouette of a human ship, barely visible against the stars. Are they watching us? The child asked. Yes, the father said. Will they hurt us? The father hesitated, then shook his head. No, I think they're making sure no one else does. In Karen space, unrest grew. Without war, industries failed. Military leaders lost purpose. Old rivalries turned inward. Protests erupted, not against humanity, but against leaders who no longer had enemies to point to. The warlord watched reports of riots and sabotage with growing despair. They've undone us, he muttered. No, said one of his advisors quietly. They've shown us what we are without war. That was harder to fight. In the Concord chamber, a new concern emerged. They're not leaving, a strategist said. What happens when the galaxy grows again? When new powers rise? The human voice answered before Kethrix could speak. We will still be here. And if we reject this future? Kethrix asked. The reply was immediate. Then you will face us, the human said. Early, cleanly, without war. Kethrix absorbed that in silence. You've made yourselves the final authority, he said at last. No, the human replied. We have made escalation obsolete. Another layer of the record unlocked. Not text this time. Footage. Ancient human worlds reduced to ash. Stars collapsing under weapons never meant to exist. Human fleets arriving too late. Kethrix watched as a human officer stood amid ruins, staring at a dead sky. We learned the hard way. The human voice said quietly. We will not allow the galaxy to learn the same lesson. The footage ended. Silence returned. In the far reaches of human space, within the containment zones, alarms flared briefly, then settled. Systems adjusted. Field stabilized. A human engineer wiped sweat from her brow and looked at the status board. Containment holding, she said. Her commander nodded. And the cost? Acceptable, she replied. It always is. Back in the Concorde, the archivist leaned back, exhausted. They aren't gods, she said. They're guardians. Kethrix stared at the map of a quieter galaxy, dotted with unmoving human fleets. Guardians don't get to rest, he said. No, the archivist replied. But they chose that. A final transmission arrived, this one broadcast to every listening mind. The war has ended, the human voice said. The consequences remain. Human ships adjusted position minutely, locking in their long-term watch. This galaxy is free to grow, the voice continued. But it will not be free to burn itself again. Across the stars, species listened. Some in gratitude, some in resentment, some in fear, all in understanding. Humanity had not come to rule. They had come to stay. And for the first time since the war began, the galaxy understood the true cost of peace was not submission, but responsibility. The kind only a species willing to bind itself could enforce. And humanity had already tightened the chains around itself first. Peace did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, unevenly, like light returning after a long eclipse. Some systems embraced it immediately, shutting down fleets and reopening trade routes within days. Others hesitated, unsure whether this quiet was real or only the pause before something worse. And everywhere, humanity watched. The human fleets did not patrol in the way others understood. They did not challenge ships or demand identification. They did not broadcast warnings or issue commands. They simply remained, silent shapes at the edges of important space, unmoving reference points that reminded everyone of where the limits were. For many species, that was unbearable. In the Concorde chamber, complaints began to arrive within the first standard week. They're violating our sovereignty by presence alone, one ambassador argued. Their ships orbit our major routes without permission. They do nothing, another countered. Is existence now an act of aggression? Kethrix listened to it all, his expression unreadable. He had commanded fleets his entire life. He understood intimidation. He also understood restraint. This is not occupation, he said finally. This is accountability. That did not satisfy everyone. On worlds that had glorified war for generations, peace felt like suffocation. Military leaders found themselves without purpose. Industries built on weapons collapsed. Heroes of old conflicts were suddenly irrelevant, their victories meaningless under the new order. Unrest followed. In the Talrun Reach, a former admiral led a separatist movement, claiming humanity had turned the galaxy into a prison. His followers sabotaged relay stations and attacked civilian convoys, hoping to provoke a response. None came. The attacks failed anyway. Weapons malfunctioned. Explosives refused to detonate. Ships lost power mid-maneuver and drifted harmlessly until authorities arrived. The former admiral screamed at the stars, demanding the humans face him. They did not answer. They did not need to. The message was clear. Violence no longer worked. That terrified people more than any show of force ever had. In Karen space, the effects were deeper and darker. Without war, the syndicate's social structure began to unravel. Entire castes had been defined by conquest and command. Now their fleets sat idle, their weapons useless, their authority questioned by civilians who no longer feared external enemies. Food shortages followed as military logistics failed to adapt to civilian needs. Riots broke out, not against humanity, but against the warlords who had promised strength and delivered stagnation. The Karen warlord watched the reports in silence. His empire still existed, but it was hollow. They took our future, he said bitterly. An old advisor, one who had seen earlier wars, shook his head. No, they took away the lie that war was our future. Elsewhere, something unexpected happened. Joint councils formed between former enemies. Worlds once locked in total war opened diplomatic channels out of necessity. Trade agreements replaced arms treaties. Shared reconstruction projects emerged, not out of trust, but out of mutual exhaustion. On a shattered moon between two rival powers, engineers from both sides worked together to rebuild a shattered habitat ring. They did not speak much. They did not forgive. But they worked, because the alternative no longer existed. Above them, a human ship hung motionless, silent witness to cooperation born from constraint. A young engineer looked up at it one day and felt an unfamiliar emotion. Not fear, pressure, the sense that every action mattered now. In the Concord chamber, the archivist continued to study the human records. More layers unlocked over time, not all at once, as if humanity were revealing itself carefully. She found accounts of internal human debates spanning centuries. Arguments over whether they had the right to intervene. Whether restraint imposed by force was still restraint. Whether the galaxy would grow to hate them. They questioned themselves constantly, she told Kethrix. They never agreed completely. That makes them dangerous, Kethrix replied. And trustworthy. A new transmission arrived one cycle later, addressed privately to the Concord. You are adapting, the human voice said. This is expected. You cannot watch forever, Kethrix replied. Eventually, the galaxy will test you again. Yes, the human answered. So will we. The statement unsettled him. What does that mean? It means, the human said, that this burden is not static. The archivist's console lit up with new data. Human containment zones were expanding, not outward, inward. Systems once populated were being deliberately evacuated. Stars were being dimmed further. Entire regions of human space were being converted into deeper isolation layers. They're increasing their own restrictions, the archivist said, stunned. Why? The answer came without delay. Because power grows, the human voice said. And unchecked growth ends badly. Kethrix felt a strange mix of awe and unease. You're limiting yourselves to protect us? Yes, the human replied. And to protect ourselves from becoming what you fear. Across human space, the cost mounted. Families relocated again and again as containment parameters tightened. Engineers worked endless cycles maintaining systems that would never be seen by outsiders. Children grew up knowing their worlds existed not for prosperity, but as safeguards. And they accepted it, because they remembered the past. On one such world, a human child asked her mother why they lived so far from everything else. So others don't have to, her mother replied. In the wider galaxy, resentment simmered alongside gratitude. Some leaders whispered that humanity had become the ultimate authority, regardless of what they claimed. Others argued that this authority had been earned through sacrifice, not conquest. Small rebellions continued, but they grew weaker each time. Without escalation, without the promise of decisive violence, movements built on anger lost momentum. War, it turned out, was addictive, and humanity had cut off the supply. Years passed. The presence of the human fleets became background reality, like gravity or time. Children grew up never knowing total war. Military academies rewrote their curricula, focusing on defense, disaster response, and diplomacy. A generation rose that saw war as something old and strange. That was when the next test came. In a distant, unaligned region beyond the Concord's reach, a new power emerged. A species that had not lived through the recent war, that had not felt the pressure of the human gaze for long. They developed a weapon, not a stellar collapse device. Something subtler. Something designed to bypass containment by acting slowly, invisibly. The first signs were minor. Communication delays. Energy fluctuations. Nothing that justified alarm. Until a human observer ship altered course. For the first time in years, a human vessel moved decisively, accelerating toward the region in question. Across the galaxy, attention snapped into focus. Are they intervening? Leaders asked. Is the line being tested again? The human voice did not broadcast. It spoke only to those responsible. You are approaching a forbidden path, it said. The response was defiant. We have broken no treaty. You have broken intent, the human replied. The weapon was never activated. It simply stopped functioning. Its designers found their research erased, their systems locked, their funding networks dismantled overnight. No punishment followed. Just prevention. The message was unmistakable. Humanity was not reacting to war anymore. They were preventing it before it could exist. Kethrix watched the reports with a heavy expression. This is the future, then. Yes, the archivist said. A quieter one. Or a more fragile one, he replied. High above, the human fleets adjusted minutely, maintaining their endless watch. Within their own space, debates continued. Philosophers argued. Engineers calculated margins. Leaders questioned how long they could hold this line without becoming tyrants in all but name. But every time doubt rose too high, the old footage was replayed. Burning stars, dead worlds, silence where life had been, and the choice became clear again. Humanity had not saved the galaxy. They had chained it to restraint. And as heavy as that chain was, as costly and lonely as the role became, they carried it. Because someone had to. And because this time, they refused to look away. The first sign that the galaxy had truly changed was not peace. It was hesitation. For centuries, conflict had followed a familiar pattern. Threats escalated. Fleets mobilized. Someone fired first, because waiting was weakness and restraint meant losing advantage. History had rewarded speed and brutality. Now, when crises emerged, something different happened. Leaders paused. In the Concord chamber, High Marshal Kethrix watched a live feed from a border dispute between two mid-tier powers. The issue was small by old standards, mining rights around a gas giant, conflicting claims backed by armed patrols. In the past, this would have turned violent within hours. Instead, both fleets held position. Neither advanced. Neither retreated. They waited. They're afraid, one counselor said. Kethrix shook his head. No, they're thinking. Across the disputed system, commanders ran simulations and recalculated outcomes, not just against each other, but against the unseen variable that now existed in every equation. What happens if this escalates? What happens if humanity decides it has crossed the line? No one knew the exact threshold. Humanity had never published rules, never issued a list of forbidden actions. They had only demonstrated consequences. And uncertainty was far more effective than fear. The standoff ended without a shot fired. The fleets withdrew. Arbitration followed. The result disappointed both sides. And yet, both accepted it. That acceptance echoed across the galaxy. Conflicts did not vanish. Species still argued, competed, postured. But they argued with words more often than weapons. When tensions rose too high, someone always asked the same question. Is this worth their attention? On 100 worlds, military academies revised their teachings again. Strategy courses replaced total victory doctrine with escalation management. Cadets were taught how to win without crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. Some hated it. Veterans of the old wars spoke bitterly of a galaxy made weak by an invisible warden. They told stories of glorious battles and decisive annihilation, of a time when strength meant dominance, not control. Young listeners found those stories strange. Why destroy what you could share? Why risk everything when restraint worked? The generational divide widened quietly. In Karen's space, the change was painful but undeniable. Years after their forced disarmament, the Syndicate no longer resembled the empire it had been. Borders softened. Former war fleets became freight carriers and disaster response vessels. The warlord still lived, but he ruled little more than a fractured coalition struggling to redefine itself. One evening, he stood on a balcony overlooking a city that had once thrived on military production. Now factories lay dormant or repurposed, and the streets below were filled not with marching formations, but with markets and protests. They broke us, he said to no one. A voice answered. No, the human said. The warlord turned sharply. A human figure stood a few steps away, unarmed, wearing no symbols of authority. You're here, the warlord said. To finish the job? The human shook his head. To see if you understood. The warlord laughed bitterly. You took everything that made us strong. No, the human replied. We took away what made you dangerous to everyone else. The warlord stared at the city. And what am I now? The human followed his gaze. That, he said, is up to you. Then he was gone, leaving no guards, no threats, no further explanation. For the first time, the warlord felt something close to choice. Elsewhere, resentment took subtler forms. Some species accused humanity of cultural domination. Others claimed that the very idea of restraint was a human value imposed on a diverse galaxy. Philosophers debated whether enforced peace was truly peace, or simply war delayed indefinitely. The questions were never answered. Humanity did not respond to criticism. They did not defend themselves in public forums or justify their actions in grand speeches. They allowed debate to exist, even when it turned hostile. They intervened only when debates threatened to turn into annihilation. That restraint, more than their power, unsettled everyone. The archivist noticed the pattern long before others did. They're not just watching wars, she told Kethrix one cycle. They're watching us change. How so, he asked. She pulled up decades of comparative data. Conflict duration, casualty ratios, recovery times. Wars are shorter, she said. Smaller, less destructive. Even when humanity doesn't intervene directly, everyone behaves as if they might. Kethrix studied the data. A deterrent without constant action. Yes, she said. They've altered behavior itself. A message arrived shortly after, this one unlike any before. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. Selected leaders across the galaxy were invited to observe a human containment zone firsthand. Not virtually. In person. Panic and debate followed. Why show us now, some asked. What are they hiding? Others argued it was a trap or propaganda. Kethrix accepted without hesitation. When his vessel crossed into human-controlled space, the difference was immediate. Space felt quieter. Not empty, but ordered. Movement followed strict paths. Energy flows were regulated with precision beyond anything he had seen. Then he saw the containment zones. Entire systems locked into stable configurations that defied natural chaos. Artificial stars held at controlled output. Gravity fields layered like armor. Vast structures absorbing forces that should have torn reality apart. This is where we bury our worst ideas, the human guide explained. Weapons that should never be used. Technologies that end civilizations. And if containment fails? Kethrix asked. It won't, the human replied. Because we live here. Kethrix stared at the distant glow of a dimmed star. You place yourselves between the galaxy and its own destruction. Yes, the human said. Because someone must. Why you? Kethrix asked. The human considered the question. Because we learned first, he said. And because we survived learning. On the return journey, Kethrix said nothing. The weight of what he had seen pressed heavily on him. Back in the Concord chamber, he spoke plainly. They are not our rulers, he said. They are our fail-safe. That did not end the debate. Years passed. A major crisis loomed when two rising powers nearly came to blows over a newly discovered cluster rich in rare matter. Both mobilized fleets. Both issued ultimatums. The galaxy held its breath. Human ships did not move. Instead, a single message arrived. We will not intervene, the human voice said. Unless you ask us to. The silence that followed was heavier than any threat. The fleets stood down within hours. Not because humanity demanded it, but because the galaxy had learned something new. It could stop itself. That realization spread faster than any fleet ever had. Humanity watched, quietly, not with satisfaction, with vigilance, because they knew the truth better than anyone. Restraint was not permanent. It was a muscle, and muscles weakened if never tested. So they stayed, not as conquerors, not as gods, but as the memory of what happened when no one was willing to say enough. The galaxy learned to hesitate, and in that hesitation, it found a future that had once seemed impossible. History did not record the end of the war as a victory. There were no dates carved into monuments. No banners hung in orbit. No species claimed credit. When scholars later tried to name the moment everything changed, they argued endlessly, because no single event felt large enough. The war did not end in fire. It ended in restraint. And restraint left no ruins to point at. Generations passed. Children were born who never heard orbital bombardment. Fleets became tools of transport and rescue more often than destruction. Borders still existed, but they were lines of law instead of lines of blood. And always, at the edges of power, humanity remained. Not visible everywhere, not intrusive, but present enough that no one ever forgot. The phrase entered common speech across dozens of languages. Don't push it. Everyone knew what it meant. In the Concord chamber, now expanded and quieter than it had ever been, High Marshal Kethrix stood before a gathering that felt different from all those before it. His movements were slower now. His voice carried the weight of age and memory. We have not had a galactic war in 90 standard years, he said. That alone would have been considered impossible. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. And yet, he continued, conflict has not vanished. It has merely changed shape. Piracy still existed, but it was small and contained. Extremist movements flared occasionally, only to collapse when violence failed to achieve results. Political struggles played out through trade sanctions, legal battles, and diplomacy rather than fleets. The galaxy had not become peaceful. It had become careful. The archivist, older now and no longer junior, stood beside Kethrix. She brought up the final report. Human interventions, minimal. Escalation events, decreasing. Self-resolved conflicts, increasing. They are stepping back, one counselor noted. Slowly. Yes, the archivist said. Because they can. Humanity had learned something else over time. A constant presence was no longer required. The myth did the work now. On a distant frontier world, a young officer studied old recordings of the war. Not because he expected to fight one, but because he was curious. The idea of entire systems burning felt unreal, like fiction exaggerated beyond reason. Did this really happen? He asked his instructor. Yes, the instructor replied. And worse. Why did they let it get that far? The instructor paused. Because no one believed the myth, back then. Far beyond the Concord, in the depths of human-controlled space, debates continued. Human councils argued not about how to enforce restraint, but when to finally withdraw. We've changed the trajectory, one voice said. The galaxy can handle itself now. Or it's learned to behave while we're watching, another countered. That's not the same thing. They studied projections centuries into the future. Rising civilizations, technological curves, cultural shifts. Some models showed stability. Others showed collapse, slow at first, then sudden. The past haunted every discussion. A senior human, one who remembered the first intervention personally, spoke at last. We didn't come back to be worshipped, she said. And we didn't come back to rule. We came back because no one else could stop the fall. She looked at the star map, quiet and orderly. If we leave too soon, she continued, the myth fades. And when it fades, someone will test it. Not out of malice. Out of curiosity. Silence followed. The decision was delayed again. And again, humanity stayed. Not because it wanted to. Because it remembered. On the edges of Karen space, something unexpected happened decades later. A new generation rose. One that had grown up without war. They questioned the old stories, the old bitterness. They demanded reforms, not revenge. The former warlord, long retired, watched a broadcast of young leaders debating trade routes and social policy instead of military dominance. He laughed quietly. They didn't break us, he said to an empty room. They outlived us. On a memorial world once destined for destruction, a monument was finally built. Not to humanity, to restraint. It bore no images of ships or weapons. Only a simple inscription, translated into dozens of languages. Here, the galaxy chose not to burn. Humanity did not attend the dedication. They watched from afar. Years became centuries. The human fleets grew fewer, less visible. Some containment zones were dismantled carefully, their burdens reduced as dangerous technologies were forgotten or rendered obsolete. Still, a core remained. A quiet line that never moved. Stories changed over time. Children no longer spoke of humanity as monsters or saviors. They spoke of them the way one speaks of gravity. Always there, rarely questioned, absolutely real. Some even doubted they still existed. They're just a story, skeptics claimed. A useful one. Then, one day, a distant civilization beyond known space made contact. They were young, brilliant, fast-growing, and reckless. Their first transmissions boasted of weapons that bent stars and folded space. They spoke with pride, not understanding why their audience reacted with alarm instead of awe. The Concord debated for days. No one wanted to be the one to decide. In the end, no fleet was sent. No ultimatum issued. Only a single message, relayed through channels so old they had nearly been forgotten. This path has been walked before, the message said. It ends badly. The young civilization laughed. Until a human ship appeared at the edge of their space. Just one. Silent. Waiting. The message repeated, this time closer. This path ends badly. And for the first time, the young civilization hesitated. Back in the Concord chamber, the archivist closed the report and looked at Kethrix. "The myth still works," she said. "Yes," he replied, "because it's not a lie." Far beyond the galactic core, in the deep quiet where human space blended into nothing, a small group of humans watched the stars. "How long do you think this will last?" one asked. The oldest among them considered the question carefully. "As long as it has to," she said, "and no longer." "And after?" She smiled, faint and tired. "After that," she said, "will be a story again." The human fleets held position, fewer than before, quieter than ever. The galaxy moved on. But deep in its memory, something permanent remained. A lesson written not in fire, but in pause. That power without restraint destroys. That restraint without memory fades. And that once, just once, the galaxy had reached the brink, and a forgotten species had returned not to conquer it, but to stop it from destroying itself. Humanity became myth again, not because they vanished, but because the galaxy finally understood why they had never wanted to be more.